Hello to everyone. Welcome to this new session of the Academy of the UN Global Compact, and where we're going to explore the SDG Action Manager that was recently launched.
To begin with, what is the SDG Action Manager? As we know, the world today is not on track to achieve the global goals. We have done a lot of progress, but still, this is not fast enough. We know that no country is currently on track to achieve these goals. And we also know that the world is now headed towards 3.9 centigrade temperature rise by the end of the century instead of the 1.5 threshold that we need to limit the worst impacts on the climate. We also know that we must at least halve the emissions by 2030 in order to avoid some of these worst consequences. We know also that as from the CEOs' different opinions, we know that 78% of the CEOs in 2016 saw opportunities to contribute to the global goals through their core business. But unfortunately, in 2019, only 48% of companies say that they are implementing sustainability into their operations. Also, almost half of the CEOs said that business would be the most important actor in the delivery of the global goals in 2016. But today, only 21% of CEOs feel that business is currently playing a critical role in contributing to the global goals. So this is one of the reasons that we felt that there was a need in the market and appetite for a tool that would better explain how we can reach together and how, as a business, we can contribute to attaining the Sustainable Development Goals in 2030. And this is why we got together the Global Compact and B-Lab with a shared vision, which is to use business as a force for good. So from the side of the UN Global Compact, we have a global outreach with more than 10,000 companies around the world. We have content expertise. We have the 10 principles of the Global Compact and the SDGs as part of our mission. And this comes from the fact that we belong to the UN ecosystem because we are a UN initiative. On the side of B-Lab, they have a lot of expertise in sustainability assessment and content, and they have a very powerful technical platform where they have the B impact assessment and B analytics as a tool of using the information gathered by the B impact assessment. So today we're introducing the SDG Action Manager, which is a free web-based impact management solution available to everyone. So it means that anyone can access it on the internet, and it is for free. You have to pay nothing. And it enables businesses to take action on the Sustainable Development Goals through 2030. Also, the SDG Action Manager brings together B-Lab, B Impact Assessment, the 10 principles of the Global Compact, and the Sustainable Development Goals to enable meaningful business action through dynamic self-assessment, benchmarking, and improvement. It was launched in January 2020, and it is available in English, French, Italian, Portuguese, and Spanish. But concretely, what are the features and the functionalities of this tool? So how does it help you? So first of all, it enables to find your starting point. You can learn which SDGs matter most to you based on your company profile and how to take action today. So it is important to note that this feature that we have in terms of finding which are the most important SDGs for you to act on are based on the WBA World Benchmarking Alliance work that is public and is available to everyone. They created a grid where you can see for each of the different industries which are the SDGs that make more sense and that can be most impacted by the business. And we use that as, I would say, as a proxy, as an approach of determining which are the material topics for you. This in no way can be substituted to good materiality analysis that should be carried on specifically for your own company. But it is a proxy, as I said before, based on several data that you enter at the beginning of the tool, plus obviously the sector and the industry where you are. Then it also helps, this tool, it also helps understand and share your impact. You can get a clear view of how the operations of your own company plus the supply chain and the business model create positive impact. And also you can identify the risk areas for each of the SDGs. You can set goals and track the improvement. We have only 10 years to achieve the SDGs, and this enables you to stay motivated and to visualize the progress that your company is doing on the dashboard. Also, you can collaborate across your company. You can invite colleagues to join the SDG Action Manager and to contribute with their expertise, specifically on a topic that is specific to them. And you can see the real-time progress and performance day after day. Also, you can learn at every step. You can determine high-impact action-based and thought-provoking and actionable assessment questions, benchmarks, and improvement guides. And on this point, it is important to note, and I think that Dan is going to show it afterwards, that you can have quick access through an icon, quick access to the different resources that the UN Global Compact has in its own smart library. So if you feel that you want to learn more on a specific topic, through the questions that you are answering, you can go to this icon, click on it, and you will have all the information that we have to share about that specific topic.
So by way of background, as Laura mentioned, whenever a user registers for the SDG Action Manager, they answer a few simple profile questions that essentially loads the appropriate content within the SDG Action Manager for your company. And so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to walk you through a demo of the platform as if you've already registered. And I'm going to walk us through an example for a manufacturing company that is based in the United States and is of an employee base of between 250 employees and 1,000. Most importantly, to the features that Laura mentioned, it has been designed within the tool. The whole SDG Action Manager takes what we refer to as a module approach, in which the content is organized and compartmentalized by different topic areas, primarily based on the SDGs. However, all companies actually start with what we refer to as the baseline module, which is intended to provide a comprehensive starting point for all businesses that's rooted in the 10 principles of the United Nations Global Compact. As Laura also mentioned, for identifying starting points, the platform also provides a series of initial recommendations of what other modules are most relevant to a particular company based on the industry and sector that they're based in. And that is based on the research of the World Benchmarking Alliance. And so you can see here on the homepage of your SDG Action Manager, once you've registered and you're using it, the breakdown of the modules throughout the entire homepage, beginning with the baseline, those recommended modules, and then all remaining modules after that. Once you're ready to go and get in, you can begin with that baseline module. I've already gone ahead and completed the baseline, and that's so we can quickly maneuver between different modules. Everyone begins with that baseline, and in order to maintain the fact that everyone starts with a comprehensive assessment, it's actually required to go through that baseline before the other modules are unlocked. I'm going to walk us through the baseline module, and then I'm going to navigate us over to one of the recommended SDGs for the particular company that I'm operating in. But you can see here within each module, there's further breakdowns of topic areas. And so within the baseline, you'll actually start with a general introduction that's largely oriented around the Sustainable Development Goals and some general questions, before then also seeing a series of questions that are organized by the structure of the UNGC 10 principles. And so you can see each of the principles in the introduction of each of the individual questions, and then you're able to navigate directly into individual questions to identify what are essentially the best practices related to these topics, to both identify opportunities to continue to learn and improve, as well as to assess your performance as you go. I'm going to now move us over to one of the particular SDG modules. And so once you've completed your baseline, and now you have a series of these recommended SDGs, in this case for my particular company, that there are 2 that have been recommended: good health and well-being, and responsible consumption and production. And when I enter into one of these modules, you'll see a consistent structure throughout each of the SDGs that are oriented around the different parts of the company's business that can actually drive contributions to all of the SDGs. And so it begins with a series of questions related to how a company's business model might be oriented towards positively contributing to them. Then moves on to how a company's internal operations is being managed to both mitigate risks to that SDG, but also create opportunities to contribute onto the company's supply chain, specifically as a key area of frequent opportunity for engagement around the SDGs, onto collective action, which is intended to be reflective of some of the broader efforts that a company can undertake in their efforts to contribute. And then finally, the risk level of a company. And the intent of this section is to actually do something quite different. And rather than assess best practices, to give the company an opportunity to reflect on what might be some practices or aspects of their business that is a good indicator of potential areas where they might be inhibiting achievement of those SDGs. And so there's some overlap with the content in the rest of the assessment of the modules, but it's intended to also give that sort of prioritization of where there might be key risks as you go through these tools. I'd like to navigate into a specific question now and show you some of the resources within it. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to move us over to what we refer to as the performance report, where you can see a more visualized breakdown of how a company is performing. And so I'm going to focus on a question within the internal operations section and take us to a question around how a company's products might be designed with environmental considerations specifically in mind. And so this is a particular question that obviously has been mapped and linked to SDG 12. And again, for this particular demo that we're sharing, this is designed for a manufacturing company. And so this question might not necessarily show up for a service company, for instance, because this is oriented around a company who is actually manufacturing physical products. But you can see here what the intent of the question is to do is not only identify what are the best practices for an individual company, but how to evaluate a company's performance in relation to those best practices. And so you're able to review the question, take a look at the individual answer options that are reflective of those best practices, and identify what are the things that the company is already doing. You can see the points available at the bottom here indicating an overall value of a question. And as you actually change your answer options and save your answers, you're able to see points being earned at the bottom here for each of the things that you are doing. That all aggregates up to your overall performance on a module. But most importantly, it's intended to give you the opportunity to reflect on what are those best practices that you're doing, and what are the best practices that you can actually consider adopting to improve and find those opportunities that everyone on the call has been interested in the future. For each individual question, you can click on the Learn More button to access a variety of resources to both help you answer these questions and identify those improvements. And so it begins with a series of just explanations and instructions to help companies better understand some of the terminology that might be used in individual questions, as well as to provide access to what are the specific SDG targets that any of these questions have been actually mapped to. And you can see here, because the SDGs are so cross-cutting, even if a question is existing in one particular module, you can also see linkages to other SDGs and other targets across them as well. Laura also mentioned the access to the UN Global Compact's incredible and extensive smart resource library. And so for each of the resources that have been developed in that library, when it's been associated with a particular question in the Action Manager, you can directly access those resources to identify how to improve within this platform as well. Over time, our intent is to also feature specific examples of best practices that companies themselves are undertaking. And so as you use the tool, we actually encourage users to submit those best practices so we can consider featuring them within the platform in the future. And that's actually through this feedback mechanism, in which you can not only provide input as to how we can continue to improve these questions, but also, like I mentioned, include additional resources or particular best practices that you would like to yourself share to this living platform. All of this is intended to create an opportunity for learning and education on the part of a company, as well as to help a company track their performance over time. And that happens not only through seeing the individual best practices in the questions and the resources, as well as the potential score that a user gets to access as they complete the modules, but it also creates the opportunity to actually set goals within the platform itself. And so for this particular question, if you mark the star option, you're going to see a goal page pop up in which you see not only your current performance, so your current answers on a question, but you can also indicate what are some of the things that you specifically would like to do related to this topic over time. And so as a manufacturer, I'm recognizing that there are a lot of opportunities for me to think about what it is that I can be doing with my products around design for the environment and therefore contributing to SDG 12. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to mark actually improving transparency about resource content on my items to help enable recycling. And I'm going to spend some time thinking about how there could be mechanisms for take-back programs for my products to try to enable reuse and a more circular economy with them. And so in addition to just marking those questions, I can then add notes, including who is going to be the project lead and any other useful information that could be useful for us to track as an organization, how we're going to address this over time. You can also go down and actually indicate what you see as potential deadlines or goals in which you'd like to achieve some of these practices. And so we can set a 6-month indicator, and then we can also opt in to receive email reminders for the goal itself, so you can continue to hold yourself accountable as well. And then once I save that, you'll see that the goal here is marked as highlighted, so you can always see that that's a goal that you've set. You can also access specific reports in which you're able to see all of the goals that your company has set and focus specifically on those areas of improvement. You can see that at the improvement report option right here below the reports tab. I'm not going to navigate us to there now because we've only just set one goal at this stage, but I am going to navigate us over to the SDG performance report as a way to conclude before handing things over back to Laura to share the visualizations of what this all looks like. And so my company has now completed a portion of the baseline metric set, as well as this SDG 12 module. And so within each of these, you can see not only your overall performance on that module as a whole, but also a breakdown of your performance on the subtopic areas that are featured in each of these modules. Importantly, one thing that I'd like to acknowledge as a key resource that we know users are really interested in and that we're really excited to provide is not only the ability to have a company evaluate and assess their performance against all of these questions that are featured, but also to actually enable benchmarking against other users of the tool. And so importantly, we acknowledge, given the fact that the SDGs are so broad and comprehensive, and there's many different ways for companies to contribute to them, high performance on these modules might actually be nowhere near a range of scoring the full possible credit on all of these questions. So that's not something to fret about. It's just instead intended to acknowledge that there are many different ways that companies can be contributing, and there are many different best practices that they can adopt. And once we've had enough time and an increase in our users, what we'll also be able to do within these platforms is actually share benchmarking data, so you can see not only where you're performing on any of these individual areas, but you can see how that might compare to other user types, anonymously, of course. So you can see if you're performing better or worse than what you might be considered as your peers. And the intent there is to not only help you understand your overall performance, but ideally identify what might be key priority areas and real opportunities for you to continue to improve your own performance over time.
Now I would like to invite Jessica Yoganadam from Danone to tell us her experience as far as the tool itself is and how you're using it in your organization. Over to you, Jessica.
So yes, everyone, I'm really happy to share Danone's experience through the SDG Action Manager, because we had the opportunity to beta test the tool, and I'm really happy to share with you our feedbacks and how we truly believe in the value that the tool is bringing for all kinds of organizations, from non-profit to companies. But just let me start with the context when it comes to the SDGs in Danone, because we firmly believe at Danone that the SDGs cannot be achieved without collaboration and co-creation. That's the basics of SDG 17. And we truly believe in the fact that business need to take a leadership role, and the SDG Action Manager is actually enabling business to do so. The other thing is that back in 2018, we have defined 9 goals as per 2030, and these company goals that we have defined are aligned now with the Sustainable Development Goals in order to reflect the interdependencies which is inherent to our economic system. And last but not least, but part of these 9 goals, we have one goal which is dedicated to the fact that we want to be certified as a B Corp, as a multinational, because we again truly believe that we believe in companies that are integrating stakeholder thinking at the heart of their business model, and that our business as a force for good. Having said that, now that we have tested the SDG Action Manager, I would like to focus on 5 main things that I think that are truly important for anyone who wants to start using the tool. The first one is that it is a tool which is actually business oriented. I saw from the results of the poll that a lot of you were interested in to what extent is the SDG Action Manager tool enabling companies through their business model to integrate SDGs. Well, the good news is that the SDG Action Manager enable actually company to get a clear view, as Dan showed you, a clear view on how operations, supply chain, your whole business model as a whole create positive impact, but also in order for companies to identify the risks and opportunities behind each SDG. The second thing that I wanted to emphasize on is when you're an organization, and especially when you're a company and that you are committed to sustainability, you are assessed by a lot of organization, you have a lot of initiatives under which you can report when it comes to sustainability. And actually the SDG Action Manager enable converging reporting frameworks because as it was well explained by Laura, through one and single tool, you can have the most of the B-Lab impact assessment, but also the 10 principles of the UN Global Compact, and obviously the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. And we truly believe that convergence and harmonization is truly needed. The third idea that I wanted to emphasize on is the materiality approach that the SDG Action Manager is providing. Because when I remember of at Danone, when we started our journey towards the SDG, the first question we asked ourselves was, what are the SDGs that we need to take action on? Shall we consider all of them? Do we need to prioritize some of them? What is the most relevant according to our business model? And thanks to the SDG Action Manager, you have an identifications of the SDGs that matter most based on a company's profile. The fourth idea that I wanted to focus on is also the fact that the SDG Action Manager is enabling company to adopt a universal language when it comes to sustainability through the SDGs. Because again, back in 2015, when we started our journey towards the SDGs, when we discovered the 17 SDGs, we realized that there were so many things behind each of them regarding the topics. For instance, when you think about SDG 2 for the first time, you may not know that you also need to tackle topics regarding to food safety, food security and safety, on access to nutrition, but also on promoting sustainable agriculture. And again, thanks to the library and the information that are available on the SDG Action Manager, you can get access to all the information behind each SDG. But on the fact that the SDG Action Manager is also helping organization to adopt a universal language, you also know that at your country level, each country has defined a roadmap as regards to the SDG. So by your organization, if you go through the SDG Action Manager, you can actually facilitate the dialogue that you can have with your authorities, your governments, the public organizations that you have in your own country, in order to explain how your organization is actually contributing to the voluntary national review regarding the SDGs. And last but not least, the tool is really easy to use, which I think is key when you're actually starting to use a new tool, because it's really collaborative also. You can make sure that a lot of experts within your organization can contribute to, and this is what we did during the beta testing with our expert on sustainable agriculture, but also for SDG 2, but also our expert on health and nutrition when it comes to reviewing SDG 3. So for me, it is also an important information to emphasize on. So as a conclusion, this is what I wanted to share with you today, because we truly believe that the SDG Action Manager is enabling businesses to take action on the Sustainable Development Goals for the 10 years that we have.
We have Steve, who is going to share his experience at Sprout Coffee. So Steve, over to you.
Thanks, Lara. Thank you, Dan. My name's Steve Joy. I'm one of the co-founders of Sprout Coffee based in Melbourne, Australia. So a bit of background about Sprout Coffee. We're an ethical and sustainable Australian office coffee business. Our vision is to be the leader in Australian ethical and sustainable office coffee with greater awareness of sustainability within Australian workplaces. We use all fair trade products. We collect all of our coffee grounds for composting at the zoo in a closed loop process that we use. We carbon offset all of our machines and our processes, and we reuse and recycle all of our packaging. As part of our process, we've become B Corp and Global Compact members over the last couple of years, and we've run an environmental management system through ISO 14001, which has led us in the past to focus on SDGs 12, 13 and 15, and we're basically trying to remove waste to landfill completely from our business. Just to put in a little bit of context for you, I can skip. This is one of our team. There's some machines we put into offices. You can see there one of our team collecting the coffee grounds. And what we do is we take that coffee ground waste to the zoo. I'm not skipping for me again. There we go. You can see my business partner Ed there with Tom, who's the head of sustainability at the zoo. We collect about a tonne of waste each week for composting. And the zoo puts into a big MRF system, and they turn that into zoo grow, which they sell to nurseries around the country. And they're a wonderful business to be associated with, and we're very, very lucky to work with them. So my findings as a business, working with the SDG Action Manager, so if I can skip, there we go. Basically the potential, any business, big or small, is able to use the Action Manager. It brings together a uniform approach to measurement. We are a small business, but I didn't feel overwhelmed by using the tool. It allows for variation of company size, which is great. It's not good to feel overwhelmed or intimidated by these types of processes, and anyone can get involved with the SDGs. The baseline that Dan talked about was a really important start. Completing the baseline helped us confirm that our previous SDG focus on 12, 13, 15 was the right direction. The baseline continued to sort of steer you in the right direction. And it's great for companies that don't have as much exposure or experience working with the SDGs. It's a really nice way to get started because it helps to point you in the right direction without feeling intimidated or overwhelmed by the different choices or options. The simplicity and the practicality, it's a really easy system to use. It doesn't require a lot of complex data. I had to find a couple of bits of information for a couple of questions, but it wasn't overly onerous or too detailed. So I was able to move through it reasonably quickly. It does take a little bit of thinking. It does make you think about your business more, but it wasn't overwhelming, which was good. The useful content, if you're a B Corp or you've seen the B Corp process before, it's very similar to that. It's easy to move through and it prompts you along the way. From my point of view, the things are easy to use, not clunky, not difficult. I don't get put off. It makes it easy for me to continue progressing. Hopefully it makes it easy for other people as well, but you shouldn't feel intimidated by using it as it sort of it thinks for you and makes the next step for you. And the content helps you to think more about what you're doing as a business. Are we measuring against the SDGs correctly? Are we asking enough of our suppliers? It makes you think a little bit more. And the goals and the actions, the dashboard we found to be a great way to visually show what we're doing to our team, as well as being able to set goals, which is what Dan just showed you earlier. That visual aspect of it makes it a really attractive thing for us to be able to show our team this is where we're performing well and this is what we can do to improve. That was a big bonus for us, I think, is showing that visually. And then be able to set actions around how do we improve our financial transparency to our team, How do we do things? You can set goals for that as well, which we looked at doing through the system. And it's not complex, again. So I would highly recommend having a go at it and getting started, especially if you've not used or worked within the SDGs before. It's a really nice way to get started. That's it from me. I'd highly recommend it. I think it's a nice way to get started. Thank you.
We have questions and answers, and we have a lot of questions. So I'm going to start with how many SDGs should a company focus on and how to prioritize. So as we mentioned before, myself and Dan, there are a few SDGs that are already recommended for your company based mainly on the activity that you are having as of today. But this does not replace a good materiality analysis that should be carried on in companies. So obviously, we recommend to start by those that are recommended in the tool, but that is just a proxy. It is so how to prioritize. It is through obviously a materiality analysis where you need to, of course, to ask your stakeholders, the different type of stakeholders that you have in your company. And but this is a complex process in some cases. So so we cannot say how many of the SDGs you might choose. Another level of answer to this question is that if you want to go into a specific topic, because for instance you are interested in climate or some actions that you are doing on water or gender equality or whatsoever, you want to maybe choose one of the SDGs and use the tool just for your information and your assessment on that specific topic. No one is going to prevent you from doing that as long as you have gone through the baseline, which is the part that Dan explained that you have to do at the very beginning, and that refers mostly to the 10 principles of the UN Global Compact. Then you're totally free to go and choose whichever SDG and to learn more about that specific SDG. Then, how can a company integrate the SDG Action Manager? Can it be used for different country offices or at different levels of the company? Yes, absolutely. This is, as we also like to call it, it is a continuous improvement tool. So the idea is that you use it for internal use in the company in order to go over the different topics and to continuously improve the level of achievement in the different topics. You can decide to apply it to a specific sector of your company. If you are in a multinational, and I can clearly imagine that the person that asked this question is working in a multinational, you typically have not only different geographies, but you also have different businesses, different lines of businesses. You also have different brands, and this we understand that could be used at all these different levels. Of course, be mindful, and this is, I'm answering specifically for multinationals, be mindful of the fact that this is not to be understood as a reporting tool. So as such, it doesn't have any kind of functionalities to consolidate data. It means that if you are reporting, if you're using it to assess, for instance, different brands or different countries, then you will not have within the tool the functionality to merge the data or to consolidate all the data together to arrive at a conclusion at corporate level. Then, can the tool be used for SMEs? Absolutely, absolutely. Both the UN Global Compact and B-Lab have an extensive expertise in SMEs. And from what I know, for having practiced it myself in my previous life, the BIA, the Business Impact Assessment from B-Lab, is very much adapted to SMEs as well. And we have to remind you that at the very basis of the SDG Action Manager are the questions that come directly from the BIA, which are obviously, all the tool is not identical at all, but there are a lot of questions that come directly from the BIA, and therefore it is perfectly adapted to SMEs and to big companies alike.
Laura, would it be useful for me to talk through a little bit of the differences between the BIA and the SDG?
Absolutely. There was another question afterwards about that, but please, please, yes, go on.
Great. And so as Laura was saying, the core of the questions that have been created for the SDG Action Manager are actually from the B Impact Assessment. And it's about 40% of the content is B Impact Assessment questions for those of you who are B Corps who have used that tool. You can also actually see within each question where a question might exist both within modules of the SDG Action Manager and whether it exists in the BIA. So you get a sense of that connection. And furthermore, and perhaps most importantly, if you complete a question in one place within the platform, you only need to answer that question once. And so if you've already done it within the B Impact Assessment, your answers are automatically transferred to the SDG Action Manager once you opt into the usage of the SDG Action Manager. So these tools are always interlinked and connecting with one another. I think that there are important differences to acknowledge in terms of the use case and what they're accomplishing. In that the B Impact Assessment is designed to be completely comprehensive and taken in its entirety. And so it's several hundred questions that it takes to go through and get an overall assessment according to the structure of that B Impact Assessment tool and pursue B Corp certification. The SDG Action Manager takes this module approach in which a company is able to, once they've completed that baseline, focus their attention on measuring and managing those questions that are those SDGs that are most relevant to them. And so what that does is it creates a complementarity between the two, and that to go completely comprehensive, a user can expand from the SDG Action Manager to the B Impact Assessment. For someone who's already been using the B Impact Assessment, they also have the opportunity to go deeper on the specific topics of the SDG Action Manager, because while the BIA is comprehensive, because it's intended to cover all of those topics, it's actually limited in its ability to actually go quite as deep on each of these underlying topics as the SDG Action Manager can. And so on something like gender equality or really any of the SDGs, it's the SDG Action Manager that provides a much more deep, comprehensive or a deep focused assessment of best practices on those topics.
Yes, thank you, Dan. I have one that is clearly for you. What kind of organization is the SDG Action Manager not suited for?
That's a really good question. What is it not suited for? So what I would say to answer that question is it has been designed for business entities, and so it's always been particularly oriented around those types of organizations. That does not mean that a nonprofit organization, for instance, couldn't get value out of the tool. Although I think it is worth acknowledging that there might be certain aspects of the questions that we're asking about that wouldn't be perfectly suited to them because it's been designed for businesses. But when it comes to the business landscape, to Laura's point before, the fact that it's customized based on size, sector, geographic market, et cetera, does mean for businesses, it's really accessible and usable for any kind.
Great. And I have another one that is also for you, Dan. Are negative impacts considered? How does the scoring work in every module?
Yeah, so the idea of negative impact versus positive impact is itself quite a complicated subject. The way that the overall approach of the SDG Action Manager is, and this is actually built off of the approach that the B Impact Assessment takes, is the scored component of these questions is oriented around what are the proactive actions and results that a company can be doing related to any of these topics. Sometimes those proactive efforts are about minimizing negative impact, which itself could be considered a contribution to the SDG on the whole, depending on the specific topic. That's all how the scored part of each module is oriented. And so anytime you're actually seeing a number on that overall visualization, it's getting at those proactive efforts of a business. As I mentioned before, there's also this element of risk level, which is intended to go beyond just those proactive efforts that a company might be undertaking and ask what are some of the specific things that might be indicative of potential negative impact that a company is engaged in based on the context they operate in or based on some of their specific practices. Importantly, that's oriented around risk level because we want to acknowledge that those negative impacts are frequently real questions of judgment and require quite a bit of context. And so it's not presuming an actual negative impact, but it's just flagging what might be a priority area of where there might be real risk, along with a follow-up question to ask about both the severity of that potential risk, but also what might be the specific management actions that a company is taking to at least manage those risks and address them. Those are not quantified in the overall performance numerically of a company on any individual module, because we actually want to be really careful to not conflate those two concepts. And so that's the reason why that risk level section is actually oriented more around flags, in which a company could receive a red, orange, yellow, or green flag based on that risk level, so that they are both prioritized and highlighted in a different way, and not just oriented into a company's quantitative score only.
Thank you. So will the info entered be public? So no, the answer is no. The information entered will only be visible by the same company that is completing the information. And so at some point, and as Dan explained during the demo, we will have enough data in order to constitute some benchmarks that will be totally anonymized. So you will only be able to see your own information, information of your own company, and compare it to different clusters of companies that will be aggregated and totally anonymized. Then there is another question about can businesses that use the SDG Action Manager share their progress externally? This is a very good question. In fact, the SDG Action Manager is not a reporting tool, so it's not intended itself to have a functionality to help share this data externally. Nevertheless, any company that is using it and feels inspired by the different questions and the progress that they're doing in the tool and the different topics, they might perfectly want to communicate on any of these topics. Then there is another question that is that I think it is totally for Dan, which is, where is the information stored?
Yeah, and so related to overarching questions around data privacy, the answers that an individual company is providing is stored within the technology platform of the SDG Action Manager, and all of that is essentially in the control of the individual company in terms of whether they are ever opting into sharing information with any key partners. But aside from that, all of the data is kept confidential. What I encourage folks to do, in addition to just talking through these types of answers, is if you go to the registration page, you can actually access some of the terms and conditions of the platform. And what that'll do is it'll enable you to read in a little bit more detail what are the actual privacy practices that exist in place for the platform. Because obviously we recognize that this is a tool that is asking questions that might be internal to a business and therefore particular sensitivity to them. And so we want to take that data privacy and the company's interests very seriously.
Okay, thank you. So another question, a very, very popular one. Who will verify the information entered? As we said before, this is not a reporting tool, and it doesn't serve to report to another stakeholder or to anyone else externally, and it will not be made public. So there is no verification asked for the information. No one is is supposed to be verifying this information. Then there is a question that might be very interesting for us to hear what Steve thinks about. It is about how many times a year do you think it is important to analyze the performance and fill out the SDG Action Manager, or at least the first thoughts that you might have on this, Steve?
Thank you. My thoughts probably be the initial inputting of data is probably the most important, and then you're going to refine your goals as you go. So you're going to start to think, oh, these are the 3 or the 4 SDGs that we're going to focus on, and then you'll create goals and actions from those 3 or 4 SDGs. And we tend to report back every quarter on our progress, and we record our data monthly. So we're constantly trying to review as we progress. But I think quarterly would be a great way to start, but it's going to be dependent on how fast you want to make things move and how much energy you have to put into each of the goals. But I think starting and seeing where your business is recommended to focus on what SDGs and not making it too many on yourself is probably a good way to get started.
Okay, thank you, Steve. Another question for you would be, who is the right person, the right job title in the organization to lead the process of completing this tool and to, I would say, animate further the organization to achieve the different goals?
For me, I don't think it has to be necessarily a certain job title. I think that anyone can be involved within a business, and I think that's what's nice about the Action Manager, is that different people from different parts of the business can be involved. I don't think that you have to be a sustainability manager or you have to be a particular job title, but I think you have to have a strong interest in being involved and taking action. And so I wouldn't say that you need to have a certain job title, just you have to have a passion for it and want to make a change.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you very much. So this is a very specific one that I don't think we covered, even if we explained a little bit the difference between BIA and the SDG Action Manager, but it might be for you, Dan. For a B Corp company, do we still need to complete the SDG Action Manager baseline?
I was on mute as I was trying to type some responses to other questions as well. And so for a company that is a certified B Corporation, yes, you also would be asked to complete that baseline, and that's because the content of that baseline is actually quite distinct from some of the content that exists in the B Impact Assessment, because that baseline is rooted in the 10 principles of the UN Global Compact. It's covering a different set of subtopics that isn't automatically covered in the B Impact Assessment. And also, to another question that was asked related to this, that baseline and those 10 principles are themselves also oriented around ensuring a level of coverage around quote unquote do no harm practices. And so it's actually beginning with a framing of what are some of those minimum things that are ensuring that a business is maintaining a certain level of business norms related to these key issues before then going into some of the positive contributions within each module towards a particular SDG.
Okay, thank you very much. Another one that I think that would be good for Steve. How long can it take a company through the whole assessment?
It's not as complex as the B Corp one, which is really good. It took me probably 2 to 3 hours of going through it to do the baseline and then spend a bit of time on each of the 3 SDGs that we focus on. I think the more time you spend, the better and the inputs. And it'll also depend probably on what data or information you need to find to add. So some people might find it really fast because they've got all the information at hand, and some people might have a little bit slower time to go back and find information and collect some data to complete. But most of it we had at hand, so it didn't take us too long to get through it. So I'd say if you put aside a couple of hours, you'll make a very good dent into it, and at least complete the baseline, and then it'll set the direction for you.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah, and just to add to that briefly, I think what's also important to highlight is that it is not necessarily the intent that a user complete every single module, and that it is really about identifying what are those priority areas, so that a company can begin to identify what are the actions that they can take through this learning opportunity and not be in a perpetual process of assessing their performance. And some of the initial research that we did indicated that in addition to that baseline, companies are generally interested in prioritizing between 1 and 5 SDGs. I want to also acknowledge that's going to vary quite significantly by companies based on their particular context and some of that materiality assessment that Laura mentioned before. For some companies, it could appropriately be much more expansive than that. In other circumstances, it might be appropriate to focus on those smaller numbers. And so this is a tool that's intended to enable that type of thought and reflection, but itself isn't necessarily mandating that a company complete all or a specific number.
Okay, yes, I just wanted to add that coming from a big multinational where I have more experience in my past life, this 2 hours that took Steve to go over the different questions is a very short period of time for some companies that have operations all over the world and that have different businesses. And so I think that it mostly depends on the size of the company. The more complex it is, the more time it will take to assess, and also the level of maturity of the company. Because as Steve mentioned, in some cases there are some topics that you have already covered regardless of the SDG Action Manager, and you have all the data you need in order to answer it. But in some other cases, you will have to work very hard to get a lot of data from around the world to try and complete the question. So it really depends on a lot of factors. We have another question, an important one, that is, how does the SDG Action Manager complement with the GRI standards? I think that would be a good one for Dan.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I'll speak a little bit about the development process that actually went into the SDG Action Manager, because GRI was involved in it. We began with a set of, in addition to the work that UN Global Compact and B-Lab did together to frame this overall tool, we had a group of core advisors of organizations who provided input into the overall approach, methodology, et cetera, of which GRI was one of them. We had a number of other iterative processes with expert contributors and beta testers to get to the point in which we launched the tool. But as a starting point, in addition to those B impact assessment questions that have been oriented into the SDG Action Manager, GRI metrics were another pretty direct input and starting point and to some of the new content that was developed for the purposes of the tool. Importantly, as has been mentioned before, GRI is providing a reporting standard. And this tool is providing a management tool. And so what that means is, to some extent, the nature of the things that we're asking about are slightly different, in that there's some translation that occurs from a reporting metric to a management educational question, even though those management questions might be rooted in those reporting metrics. But also, it means that the two can actually be used in quite a complementary way, in that the GRI standards can be organized around a company's reporting frameworks, and the SDG Action Manager can help a company, once they've done that reporting, to figure out really how they want to manage their practices to actually take action, and vice versa.
Okay, we have time for only one last question, which is, can we use this tool as a COP to the UN Global Compact? So as a communication of progress to the UN Global Compact? The answer so far is no, because we have specific questions and specific requirements for the COP. Nevertheless, we are now, as we speak, undergoing a review process of the COP. So the COP, as from next year, probably will be different from the one that we have now. And what we are having in mind, even if we need to have consultations with a lot of companies and stakeholders from all over the world. But what we are imagining as the basis of the COP would be to take a lot of questions that are coming from this tool that we have created with BLab from the SDG Action Manager. And it will totally make sense to I would say, to have more information coming from companies about how they are achieving the SDGs. So it will be total sense. It will make total sense for us to take a lot of these questions coming from this tool that we developed together. Finally, as a last message, to invite you to use the tool, of course. Now you know that you are ready to manage your action on the SDGs. Remember the 5 steps that we went over. And you will see appearing also on the documents that will be available to you, the link that you need to use in order to access the tool. Thank you very much. Please use the tool and give us feedback because we needed to take it into consideration for the next developments on the tool. Thank you very much, and see you next time. Bye.